Radio.
Some of the states have already legalized and it's working.
Providing a fresh perspective on the events shaping the cannabis industry. With your host, Deputy Chief of Roc NORML,
Steve Vanderwall.
From business and politics to medicine and technology, and everything in between. This is Roc NORML Radio.
What is up, everybody? Happy Monday. It's good to be here in studio. Coming off a long weekend following the Cannabis Symposium, which was an absolute hit. Super excited that went off as well as it did. Huge progress for our area, for our state. And now we gear up to hopefully get a new piece of legislation this week. But today's episode of Roc NORML Radio is brought to you by Tiva. The future of cannabinoid therapeutics is here. And it's happening in our backyard right here in Rochester, New York. Before we get going today, I do want to make a couple announcements. This Thursday, May 23rd at 6:30 p.m., Roc NORML is co-hosting a free screening of Grass is Greener at the Cinema Theater downtown. We'll be co-hosting that with Metro Justice in Vocal, New York. This will be at the Cinema Theater at the corner of South Clinton and Goodman, right across from Highland Park Diner. This is an incredible Netflix documentary that explores the 80 years of cannabis prohibition, starting in the 30s. Our good friend and ally, Cassandra Frederic of Drug Policy Alliance, stars in it. So we're going to watch this movie, and then we're going to have a community discussion. It's going to be a really good time. It's a free event. I'll provide the link at the end of the show so you can get on and get your tickets. And next Thursday, May 30th, we are hosting an event with Boiling Code law firm. It's called Home Growing Rochester Economy. And this is going to be a panel discussion hosted by yours truly. That's going to discuss the importance of home brewing and how it's led to a thriving microbrewery industry here in Rochester, and how we believe home cultivation of cannabis will lead to the same thing. We will have owners of Three Heads Brewery, Rock City Brewing Co., and K2 Brewery there on the panel, and it's going to be a great discussion. Like I said, next Thursday, May 30th at 6:30, more details to come. So today is of particular interest to me because we're going to nerd out a little bit and take a little bit of a scientific approach to cannabis, one of my all-time favorite topics. My guest today is a cell and molecular biologist and full professor in the Department of Biochemistry and Biophysics at the University of Rochester School of Medicine and Dentistry. He's a key opinion leader in RNA biology and directs a federally and foundation-funded research lab from which over 141 peer-reviewed publications, man, that's crazy, have emerged on biological control mechanisms affecting diseases such as cancer, elevated cholesterol, obesity-induced type 2 diabetes, and HIV/AIDS. In 2016, my guest founded Cannametrix with the goal of developing methods to enhance cannabis testing with cell-based testing standards that better inform patients and physicians of potency and dose. I'm extremely excited to have him on our show today. He is a good friend of mine, colleague, my mentor and expert reference, and just all-around good friend of myself and organization. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Harold Smith.
Thank you, Steve, for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, how cool is this studio, right? Not bad for a cannabis nonprofit, huh?
And it's very comfortable.
It's comfy.
Yeah.
So before we dive into cannabis, you've been in academia for decades and doing a lot of really cool stuff. I won't even be able to begin to scratch the surface, but at a higher level, what exactly have you spent the last couple decades focusing on?
Well, what we do in the research lab is try to figure out how diseases take over. And so there's a normal process in your body, and disease is kind of an aberration or a left-hand turn on that whole situation. And so what biochemists and molecular biologists do is they try to view disease from a point of, what chemistries are involved, what proteins, what cell mechanisms are required for a disease to actually take hold. And if we understood that, we'd kind of see the Achilles heel of the disease. And if we knew that, then we could actually try to place drugs or therapeutics or preventions on those. So I've focused for almost 40 years now on trying to understand what is the right question to ask when you're developing drugs to change the course of a disease and improve health.
And I'm sure there's a lot of right questions to ask. And in 40 years of that research, how did you find yourself, waltzing into the cannabis field?
Well, it's a story of my life where I see a need and I fill a need. And what we do every day in the lab is like not what average people think about, I would say. Sometimes I find myself shopping at Wegmans or something like that, and all of a sudden something pops in my head, and I want to turn to the person next to me and say, hey, do you know what I just thought of? I wonder if it's right. And, of course, you can't share that because you'll get carted off. But so, what I was looking at is we are molecular and genetic engineers. So we will look at, say, for diabetes, a liver cell or a muscle cell, and say we need to put something in that cell or take something out so that we could really understand the pathway of disease. In order to do that, you have to genetically control the cell. You have to know what your toolkit is. You have to be able to do rigor and reproducibility in science so you know what you found is true. And ultimately requires focusing down on a single important question. And that's really the skill that we train young scientists with. What is the question that you should be pursuing? Is it addressable? And so I'm going along on years like that. I started a company on HIV to find a new therapeutic, but now it looks like it may have curative potential. And that was strictly because no one was targeting that particular pathway. And I said to myself, well, I actually understand that. So I understand the pathway that the virus is taking. So why don't I try to pursue that? So in 2003, I launched OyaGen, and that gave me an infrastructure to understand how the pharmaceutical industry approaches drug development. Now that's key because they not only have to find a mechanism and find a drug that works on the mechanism, but then they have to know the chemistry is pure and the biological response. If I put a drug onto a tissue, I have to know what I expect to happen. And that's all related to dose and potency. And in the conversation going on in the world on cannabis, all of a sudden I realized no one's using those terms to talk about various types of cannabinoids, full spectrum products, how different strains of cannabis might differ in their chemistry, and no one's talking really about how to prove that something is at the right dose. So I thought, wow, okay, so this is what we do all the time. So I went into cell-based testing because that's a natural extension of what the pharmaceutical industry would do after chemical purity is tested. Then they look at biological potency. And that's what Cannametrix is all about. It's not replacing chemical analysis. It's a hand in glove. And that's how everything is brought to market nowadays, is chemical potency to purity followed by biological potency.
Yeah, that's kind of the cannabinoid industry is kind of the Wild West right now, and I can see that being immersed in the industry as an entrepreneur. And the problem is that there's a lack of standardization and a lack of ground rules to, for lab testing and quality and purity. So you have all these companies out there, it seems everybody and their brother and their aunt and uncle and cousin and friend is selling some sort of cannabinoid or CBD and THC product. And the good news is that people are seeing some really good results, right? Whether it's for anxiety and depression or pain and inflammation or whatever ailment you seem to be treating, there seems to be a wide variety of ailments that are being treated. The problem is that nobody understands why. And all of these companies, some of them who are making substantial returns, are making these returns without ever explaining the why. So my question is, and my fascination with this industry comes in the sense of, why does cannabis work? And I think the question that we have to answer is, well, what is the endocannabinoid system and how does that work? So in your words, what is the endocannabinoid system?
Okay, so this is your body's ability to control everyday response to the environment, response to the food, your temperament from the moment you get up to the moment you go to sleep. All of this is what scientists refer to as homeostasis. It's kind of maintaining the flow.
Like balance, right?
Balance. And the endocannabinoid system has been in human beings since they started on this planet. In fact, it's part of all mammals. And it is a complicated system. There are probably 80 different wires that work in this sense that are receivers for chemistries. Standard cannabis plant will produce 110 cannabinoids of various concentrations and of various potencies. And so if you never took cannabis from a plant or eating it, our bodies produce cannabinoids. This is a small molecule that is the signal that cells tell themselves and to neighboring cells, hey, something's going on. We should change how our metabolism is. We should modulate our behavior. And so that system is going 24/7. And then you eat a gummy bear and you introduce full spectrum cannabinoids, which have high CBD, maybe some THC, a full spectrum of other cannabinoids and terpenoids, and these go right after your endocannabinoid system throughout your entire body, and they reset the tone. They actually tell your body how much cannabinoid you should make of your own type. Those are called endocannabinoids. And then your cells start responding in all sorts of ways to one another. So the plant is rejiggering what is a system that is there to respond to the environment and to control how your body functions every day. There are people who have less functional or more functional endocannabinoid systems, and that's the variability in the population that we just, in addition to not understanding how each of the 110 cannabinoids actually work alone and how they work together when they're cooperating, what will be the individual response to this? What might work for me at one dose might require half the amount of dose for you or something like that. So the endocannabinoid system is not something artificial. It's a natural thing in our body. We make cannabinoids. Those are natural parts of our biology. And when we take in the plant material, we're actually asking it to step onto the highway of endocannabinoids and participate with what our body is doing to regulate our lives.
Yeah, it's like you have to think back to 7th and 8th grade health class when we started learning about the human body and all the body systems that, make up this piece of flesh that we call a human being. And, there's another body system that needs to be added to that list, and it is the endocannabinoid system. And the cool thing is that we're starting to see that cannabis products work best. The whole is the best, better than the sum of its parts. And that's the notion of full spectrum of cannabinoid products. When we talk about the Entourage Effect and it from a medicinal perspective, I think we all have this general understanding that it's going to be combinations of these cannabinoids and terpenes and flavonoids rather than, kind of a westernized isolate of these cannabinoids that are going to be the most efficacious. In terms of, how do you expect your, with Cannametrix and as we start to look at cannabinoids outside of THC and CBD, what trajectory do you think your work in the lab is going to have in terms of exploring these other cannabinoids?
Well, the research at large in the world is going to be looking at individual cannabinoids. Once this becomes legal in the United States federally to do research on at the university level, this is going to go, it's a new open area and people are going to jump into it and apply what they've been doing for years, whether they've been studying diabetes or cancer. Now they're going to do it in the context of cannabinoids. So we're going to see an explosion of information. That information will tell us what wiring the cells use for a particular cannabinoid. And Cannametrics, because we are molecular engineers, we're gene jockeys, really is what this is. We will go in and create a liver or a neuronal cell or an immune cell that has been altered in such a way that we can evaluate a particular cannabinoid's activity on that cell with or without that wire being present. And then we will ultimately be able, and the beauty of what Cannametrics offers an industry in terms of differentiating products in a competing marketplace, is to be able to say that this product works in human cells in a dose-dependent manner through a particular receptor pathway. Well, that doesn't get you to treats cancer, treats dermatitis, treats this, treats that, because that would not be true to be able to take it that far at this time. What it does is tell you, okay, so I know that the types of cells that I'm trying to modulate, either my neurological functions or modulate immunity, immune response in your body, modulate metabolism. I know that the cells that are involved in those processes are actually responding to this product. And now you compare two products, and both are full spectrum. Both say so much CBD or CBN. And you're wondering, why do I feel better taking one versus the other? Now that's the user finding that out. What Cannametrix wants to do is test those products ahead of time and be able to inform the user that the likelihood is that this product is for you and not the other product. And so we differentiate products in the marketplace based on their potency. The second part is that Cannametrix will be a seal of approval of products. That's also a differentiating quality. And when you see Cannametrix say this product works at this dose in human cells along a certain pathway, the next time you buy that product, you better see that same dose response, or else you know the product has slipped somehow in production or somehow has become better. But what you want to do when you take cannabinoids is you want to have a balance in what you're taking. One dose in the morning of so much, and you're good to go. And you don't want lot-to-lot variations, because that just will result in lack of compliance in taking the product. You'll quit, right? And what we don't want is people quitting the medicinal use of cannabis because they're frustrated with it not having worked reproducibly. We want to get to the point where we're delivering reproducible medicines.
Well, there's a lot of products out there, especially CBD isolates. Some of the biggest companies out there who are making the most money are selling things like CBD isolates, and patients who are buying these, or consumers who are buying these products and not seeing any results, they're kind of getting a bad taste in their mouth for the cannabis industry. You know, how many times you've heard snake oil, or this is, witchcraft, yada, yada, yada. And to think that we really haven't even begun to scratch the surface of, cannabinoid medicine. And I think about it from, my perspective and my journey as an entrepreneur, and really kind of exploring the cannabis genome and what it makes to create a really good product, is that, we're really kind of at mercy with the 0.3% THC value, right? Because that is the differentiator between a product that you could sell at Wegmans and a product that'll land your ass in jail because it's hot. But we know that every time we start extracting out THC from its original value, bringing it down to 0.3%, the rest of the cannabinoids decrease as well. So really, we're the most therapeutic windows that we're seeing are a byproduct of that 0.3%. I can't imagine if that 0.3% THC level was something like 1 or 2 or 3%, that how much more efficacious that these products would be. So for me, I mean, part of the new medical bill, I'm hoping that they increase the THC percentages so we can really start exploring what is actually happening when we have these full spectrum products. But another question that I want to talk to you about today is, so let's talk about the receptor breakdown a little bit, because we know this is an incredibly complex biochemical signaling system, right? Comprised of the CB1 receptor and the CB2 receptor. And what fascinates me is that there's, 110 different cannabinoids, all that interact with these receptors in their own capacity, and all that produce a different biological output, which we can see as evidenced by THC. You consume high THC cannabis, your CB1 receptors in your brain get flooded in your prefrontal cortex, and lo and behold, you have some sort of cognitive abnormality, right? It's not rocket science. Then CBD, on the other hand, doesn't really have the same binding affinity at all to CB1, so you're really not going to have that same psychoactive effect. But we're also seeing some serious immune system benefits because people are taking this product for so many different things. It almost seems like we're biologically wired to consume cannabis. How can we explain only having 2 receptors, but their ability to conform to 110 other cannabinoids?
Well, the answer is in one way simple and one way very complicated. The simple answer is that there's probably 80 different kinds of receptors. And just like everything else in this industry, hey, it's THC. Oh, wait a minute. Have you heard about CBD? Now everyone's talking about CBD. Some people flick their eyebrows and say, hey, CBN. And I'm saying, okay, so guys, you're just using the latest term, right? CB1 and CB2 receptors are what are in the lay discussion, but there are, and these, for anyone who's listening, are G protein coupled receptors. That's the name of them, and they have a special way of responding on the outside of cells and transducing that signal to the inside and telling the cell to do all sorts of incredible things, including changing how your genes are expressed. So the G protein coupled receptors for CB1 and CB2 are one class, but there's ion channels as well, which means the cell responds by changing how much sodium or potassium come into the cell, calcium and those kind of things. There's other small molecule receptors. So there are approximately, and this is probably a gross underestimate because it's based on current understanding, 80 different kinds of receptors for 110 different cannabinoids. Each cannabinoid can potentially interact with multiple receptors. So sometimes something, just using what's in kind of common language, let's say THC bound to something with very high affinity, CB1 receptor. This is not a single event. That occurs on that receptor on the surface of cells, but imagine that there are 79 other receptors responding to the other cannabinoids in the full spectrum product, and each of those is signaling to various extents. The entourage effect is the entire response in summation to that. It's not just because the THC, it's not just because the CBD, it's when the cell's innards, if you will, are completely rearranged by all this information coming at it. That is the entourage effect. And then one cell type is responding to another type. Your neurological system is changing and talking to all your organisms. Your immune system is changing and talking to all your organisms. And all of a sudden, the sea has changed. And that's why this is working in such a particular way. So the point I'd like to also raise, Steve, is that the pharmacological industry, pharmaceuticals, have to be pure, are best when they're a single chemical compound, 99.99% pure, just that particular chemical compound. That's how drugs are brought to market. When someone looks at the cannabis industry, oh my gosh, what a dirty product. It's got all these things in it. It's the dirty product that actually makes the person feel best. But because people are looking to try to get FDA approval, they're going, let me take pure THC, and I can even make that in a laboratory. Forget about growing plants. Or CBD, do that in a laboratory. Forget about plants. And I'm going to spike raspberry juice with low, medium, and high THC or CBD. And that's what you're going to get, and you're going to like that. And the truth probably is that is not going to be the entourage effect that you're seeking. You're not going to get the other effects. So in an effort to try to get through to the FDA with pharmaceutical standards of pure chemistry, we are trying to sell pure THC, pure CBD, and we're forgetting that what the plant actually brings us is the holism of what our body is looking for. And so that's why full spectrum products end up causing an effect that people find as, I really like this because I feel intellectually active on this product, and yet it's doing what I need it to do to modulate my immune response, or it's controlling anxiety, but at the same time it's relaxing muscles. One of the major benefits I find in my own personal experience is with someone who is a very senior citizen who's lost their appetite. They can't taste. And that's a very common thing that happens not only to the elderly, but people who are on chemotherapy for cancer, and it causes wasting. The term there in medical terms is cachexia. If you're not taking appropriate nutrition, you can't maintain body mass. You can't fight off infections and a variety, and you certainly can't fight against cancer. And so how do you maintain someone's diet? And so in the case of my own parent, this was causing deep depression, this lack of eating. And it took a 5-year battle of me trying to convince one of my parents that taking hemp extract with high concentrations of tested CBD, but full spectrum product, might be where we need to go. And given the lack of anything else working and it getting to the point where the quality of life was seriously jeopardized, the idea finally took hold. And in 3 months' time, we completely changed the disposition of this individual to where they're cooking 3 times a day, and they sold their house and moved into independent living in this beautiful place out in, the wilderness of Massachusetts. It was transformative. And I cannot tell you scientifically why that worked, but I have seen it personally, and so I'm totally committed to figuring out how it worked. But I don't think we need to hold up using it until we completely understand that. It's like was said at the a meeting that we recently were at with the Chamber of Commerce, why throw out the good while you're looking for the perfect? You know, this is working pretty well for certain circumstances, for certain people, and that's what we should go with now until we can figure out how.
It's like this whole industry has been built off anecdote. You know, the momentum, especially over the last couple of years, hasn't even really been scientifically driven. It's been anecdotally driven. You know, I know my, experience and what kind of catalyzed my obsession with the industry was my own run-in with pharmaceutical drugs, on heavy doses of Zoloft and Adderall and Trazodone every day. I was playing, as a pharmaceutical teeter-totter, playing a balancing act, and found myself digging myself in a very deep, dark hole that I never thought that I would ever get in, let alone if I could ever get out. And I had a friend introduce me to a full spectrum CBD product, and within 40 days I was off the Trazodone, I was off the Zoloft, and only taking 5 milligrams of Adderall every other day. So for me, I was like, holy cow, if that can help me, there's a lot of other people that can be helped. My fear is that there's a lot of people in this business that don't really care about helping people. They care about making a quick buck, because the process of creating a medicinal grade cannabis product is complex. Think of all the variables that go into seed to sale. Are your plants organically certified? Are they using pesticides? Are they getting TLC? What's the extraction process like? All these things that encompass a good product, and that's a food product, anything, not just a medicine product, but this is a very sensitive industry that requires TLC and care and expertise. And right now I feel like there's only a fraction of the industry that's actually devoted to that. And those that are devoted to that are hindered by their lack of ability to research this, And I'm sure you've seen it. We have, there's a million things that I'm sure you'd like to study, and scientists around the country that would like to study. But until there's that federal descheduling from a 1 to, whatever else, that research is going to be very hard. And we're going to have to sit around and kind of watch everybody else internationally make progress in this industry. How do you, especially in Rochester, do you think that there's other physicians and other scientists in the Rochester community that are looking at this industry as in depth as you are?
I know that there's a problem in doing this because this kind of research is not cheap. It's not like determining whether seeds grow well in wet climate or dry climate. It's not determining on the relative speed of a fan for delivering seeds. Those are costly but controlled costs. To do research requires an infrastructural amount of money, an ante, that is really beyond. You need to set up a lab. Well, you're probably looking at $250,000 minimum for a small lab that's about the size of this studio. A real full-scale research lab requires heftier amounts of money, millions, and that kind of money typically doesn't come from entrepreneurs. It doesn't come from philanthropic people often enough. It comes from the federal government, the taxpayers. And so the federal government has an internal program and an external program, and all the universities, with almost no exception, rely on federal dollars. If the university does something illegal, like bring cannabis products in and begin doing research on animals or cells or something like that, and this goes south, the tanks do roll in, then universities like Rochester, the leading employer, U of R, would be tremendously affected disproportionately. And most of the researchers would have to lay off their staff and close their labs. It's not like there's 50% other money and federal money. Most of the labs at places like the U of R are 100% on federal dollars. And so people have to be very cautious about how aggressively they pursue this. I started Cannametrics outside of the university so that I had the freedom to operate. And within the university, it would not have been possible now to do that without, a lot of concern by everyone. So it's costly to do research. And we have fallen behind Europe, Canada, South America in doing research. Not that we couldn't do that research or that there aren't highly skilled people, or like everything else that the United States does in research, that given the money, boom, we'd be leaders again in this area. I'm hoping to see that. But we have to look to other countries and their publications to answer very, very fundamental questions that we should be able to answer ourselves, but we have not been able to because it's been federally illegal to bring it into your lab.
That's the new medical revisions for the New York State Medical Marijuana Program are released, I think it was Monday, May 6th, and part of that bill includes initiatives for research labs and testing facilities. And essentially, hopefully, with the enactment of the States Act, which would provide protection against the feds coming in and, whatever the state's cannabis laws are, is essentially a Cole Memo 2.0, which prevents federal interference from interfering on cannabis state laws. Not with that would protect the states and allow them to have, many more research opportunities. The problem is, where's the money going to come from? Is there state-sanctioned research banks, or is the majority come from the NIH?
The real question when the state funds things is probably going to be from state money, either from taxes or the retirement fund or something of that nature. I have a different concern from a scientific point of view. I'm hoping the money will be there, so I can't really affect that. But what I'm very concerned about is who are the experts who will be peer reviewing? Who decides what research gets to be done? And at the federal level, we already have a problem with siloing, where depending on who's on the study section, you get a good review or you don't. Most reviews, most people don't think are good now. And it takes up to 18 months to get your grant funded. So if you can imagine, you're supporting in the infrastructure of your grant, all the overhead, all the indirect costs, and it's time to renew, and then it doesn't renew, and you've got 18 months. So how do you keep your staff? You don't. So the laboratories in the United States are under attack by the lack of federal support. And so many of my colleagues have dropped out of science because it's not sustainable to keep doing that, writing 5, 6, 7, 8 grants a year and getting none of them or one of them funded. That's not. If we wanted to do writing, we'd go into literature. We wouldn't be into. So who will be in the state determining what is quality of science when there's absolutely no knowledge? Who are the quote-unquote experts in cannabis science who would be sufficient to be a peer in a review? I'm very concerned about that.
Well, generally for expertise, we look to physicians and PhDs for expertise, but the problem is that endocannabinoid science isn't taught in medical school, is it?
It's not there, and it's not taught in medical school, and there's no indication that that's going to change. It's not that the young generation of doctors being trained for the next 4 years are not interested. They're fascinated. Doctors are fascinated when I say I have Cannametrics and I'm trying to have a system where we can anticipate potency of various products, maybe customize products so that they're tailored to individuals. Everyone's interested in that, but no one is willing to step across that door. And so, how do you launch a part of the medical school that doesn't tacitly say, cannabinoids, they're made, and so this is technical, out of arachidonic acid, that cells cleave that out of a membrane, and this is how it goes, and here's where it goes. Okay, did you hear enough? Thanks. And that's about the extent of it. Certainly there's a lot of information on pharmaceuticals and on dosing and on potency and on, drug metabolism. That, without a doubt, that is part of medical training. But it hasn't been relevant to talk about cannabinoids outside of the realm of bad drugs and addiction or things like that. That's how it's been cast, and so most doctors don't know that. I would say that most medical schools also suffer from a lack of training in nutrition science. And to ask doctors, what does folic acid do? Well, a vitamin, most doctors will stumble on that and not really know. And that's because it's not taught anymore, because there's not enough time in the crowded curriculum. You'll pick up nutrition on your own out there someday, So if cannabis is a nutraceutical, then certainly it isn't being treated that way in medical school. If cannabis is a pharmaceutical, we haven't gotten there yet. So we have a generation of doctors, most don't know. A generation of scientists, most have no experience with. And, full disclosure, I don't know either. But what I do know is how to do science, and I've proven that for 42 years. And I've known how to figure out the unknown by asking the right questions. And the right question in cannabis right now is, how do cells respond to full spectrum products as a measure to anticipate what will happen in a human being? And that's not adequate. That's not even adequate for where we need to go. But right now it's so superior to anything else that we're actually doing. So I think that's why we need to bring on things incrementally. As we have better understanding, we bring those in and we try to advance the entire field so that the marketplace is speaking the right language about things. They understand what pure THC means relative to THC in a full spectrum product, and those kind of things.
So here's a question, and I don't know if anybody knows the answer, because it's a complicated issue, because we know that cannabis works best as kind of an orchestra, as this symphonic substance where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. How do you even begin? Where do you start? Because you could have the purest CBD or THC or CBG or linalool terpenes or whatever, but we know that it's a specific combination, right? Mm-hmm. And doing just a little bit of math, 110 cannabinoids, 100 and some terpenes, flavonoids, you're looking at like over 20,000 different combinations of these cannabinoids. And I'd venture to say that there's specific combinations within these 20,000 combinations that are going to be the key to unlocking, some answers to treating ailments. Mm-hmm. My question is, how do you begin exploring all of those different combinations?
Well, the way this really works in practice in science is that a scientist will view something from the perspective of where their research already is. And they'll say, okay, so I study something at the cell membrane, and hey, this one works at the cell membrane, so they'll introduce that into their standard operation, and then they'll note an effect, and then they'll pursue that effect. Something else is discovered, a new cannabinoid, and they'll say, hey, I wonder. And so they'll add that. And usually the experiment is A alone, B alone, A plus B, B at different doses, A at different doses. And so those are how the experiments are designed. And the end result is, in data analysis, you try to pull that all together. So there are far more scientists than there are cannabinoids. And so this problem is, as soon as it's unleashed and funding becomes available, in less than 5 years, this is going to be transformed. What we understand will be totally transformed. What we already know is that, let's say, make it simple, instead of 110 cannabinoids, let's just pretend that there's 10. And let's say that the first two, THC and CBD, are present in very high concentrations relative to the other. The tendency of the industry now, and most people, really is to say more is better, big is best, right? But it turns out that's not the way drugs work. Some drugs in very, very small quantities are far more potent than other drugs at higher concentrations. So when we're testing for cannabinoids and reporting on 12 of them and then labeling a box based on THC or CBD combinations, we're really missing it. Because something in a full spectrum product that is 1/1,000,000th in concentration, so that much less, can be so superior in its effect that it can mitigate THC, reduce THC, or enhance CBD. And so our whole playing around of trying to minimize the labeling on a box to say this is CBD really does a disservice to the science that is really there, that it underestimates the power of full spectrum to come together and synergize, or one trumps the other, those kind of things. And that's where the science is going to go. The science is going to test individual things on particular biochemical pathways in particular diseases or health, and then they'll add in additional things. So the science is incremental. We put one block into place. We understand that's a firm block. Then we put another block into place. By the time we have maybe a dozen blocks, we realize some of the assumptions were not right. And so science recorrects itself to come back in on things. But like I said, there's far more scientists in the United States alone than there are cannabinoids. And this will be a very tractable and very interesting problem once it becomes legal.
You know, we see kind of the research and the registered organizations constantly combating with activist groups like Roc NORML because of the fear of home grow and the loophole that patients may, you know, why would patients want to buy their medicine at a 3x markup when they could just grow their own, right? And I think from a bottom line perspective, that's fair. But medicine isn't supposed to be about the bottom line. It's supposed to be about innovation. And for me, I always have thought about using the home grow program as a tool to explore the cannabinoid genome, right? Because what better way to understand all these different combinations of cannabinoids than to let thousands of people grow their own cannabis? You know, for me, in an ideal world, if I owned an RO, I would be incentivized. You know, if you want to come to my organization, you can either buy my cannabis products, right? Maybe you have anxiety, here's an anxiety strain, or we're going to provide you all the consultation and all the resources and everything you could need to grow what we think would be the best strain, right? Here's the caveat. If you happen to grow something that is of, you know, can be scientifically substantiated, then there's an intellectual property clause, right? So all of a sudden it kind of incentivizes the ROs to provide, you know, to kind of incubate almost like a Silicon Valley model to help their patients not only grow their own medicine, but to hopefully to create proprietary genetics. And in my opinion, that's probably a really good way to explore the cannabinoid genome. Right, but the problem is that how are we going to convince the ROs to allow people to grow their own medicine? You know, I think as a consumer organization, it is a non-negotiable to allow home cultivation. Right, as a consumer's right. If you can grow your own tomatoes and you can grow your own thyme in the backyard, you should be able to grow your own cannabis. So it's like we've fought this, you know, this criminal justice issue with people growing for the last 80 years, and now you're going to, you know, have this product be legal. We're going to talk about profiting. We're going to talk about research. We're going to talk about a whole, you know, industry revolution, but we're still going to make it illegal for people to grow their own plants. I think that's kind of I don't think that's right. And I think it's going to hinder a lot of the research. But I hope that doesn't come down. I hope that's not what it comes down to. But like I said, this new bill is going to be released this week. There's a lot. I think we have finally, based on the conversations that were held at the symposium from Axel Barnaby, who's, you know, one of the councilmen of Governor Cuomo's posse, Crystal Peoples-Stokes, comments from Liz Kruger. Obviously, she wasn't at the panel, but it seems that what used to be a very combative and conflicting issue seems to have found some common ground. I don't know where the negotiations are going to lie. I know the bill will not be perfect. But I think that there's a general understanding that, you know, this is a full spectrum issue. You know, I think we all, whether we're the activists or we're the medical experts or we're the public health experts or law enforcement or all these different branches, we all want the same thing at the end of the day, right? We want healthy, prosperous, thriving people in our communities, right? I don't think there's any doubt about that. And we've all been advocating for cannabis in a specific way. But kind of the whole theme of this industry is full spectrum, and the whole is better than the sum of its parts. And I think once we all realize that, hey, maybe we're going to have some disagreements with law enforcement, or we're going to have disagreements with the way the medical program is handled or whatever, I think having those conversations and finding that common ground, understanding that there's going to be disagreements, and putting all the right players at the right table, that's the only way to produce what I believe is a perfect piece of legislation. We consistently look to places like Colorado who, they made $1 billion in the first 8 months of 2018. And that's not even counting ancillary businesses, right? They're making tons and tons of cash. But they also didn't start addressing social justice issues until now, 5 years later. So you're making billions of dollars on a yearly basis, but there's still people who are in jail without their records being expunged. So it's nice as New York, you know, with being late to the party, you know, there's 11 other states have legalized for adult use. I think 35 other medical states. We can look at all these different states and say, okay, this is what worked. This is what didn't work. Let's put all the good things, you know, in a bundle, wrap it in a social justice blanket and kind of encapsulate all the issues, right? And I think that's going to be a bill that we see. I think New York has the potential to be to have the poster child legislation.
I heard that conversation from the Chamber of Commerce meetings recently too. It was kind of a consensus. What also came out is the concept of, you to have a good business, you need to understand not only your product but also your return on investments. And I think what people are focusing on, what is the overriding thing is, you can get in, you can make a whole bunch of money. And so without any particular prior skill in the area, without any particular commitment to society or medicine or anything else, you can make a lot of money. And my caution is really that's going to be a 2-year boom. And because products won't have consistency and won't have the labeling that allows doctors to make choices with their patients and for standard of care to change, which doctors are up against. It's a legal bar. You can't go against standard of care, and cannabis is currently not part of standard of care. So in order for all that to change, we need to have a perspective that is not just good business making money, but quality of product that have longevity. If that doesn't happen, a lot of people are going to make money, and then they're going to turn to the next cash cow, and the cannabis bubble will occur in a couple of years, and everyone's going to be walking away because lack of consistency, patients have lack of compliance, doctors don't know what to tell their patients, so they won't tell their patients. Everyone's selling various products. When I see a product that says 1,000 milligrams of cannabinoid on the side of it, and another product that says 500 milligrams CBD in full spectrum, I don't know what to tell you the difference is. Maybe the 500 milligrams in that bottle of CBD is 500 milligrams, and then there's another 800 or something milligrams of all the other cannabinoids versus the one that's 1,000 milligrams of cannabinoids. How much CBD is in that? How much? And so this is terribly confusing, and patients will be terribly confused when someone sells you a product that has 5 milligrams of CBD per dose. The question is, what is that going to do for you? I mean, it's like being in a room with someone smoking pot or something like that. Are you going to have the same effect? I question that we don't know what the doses are. I question that we're labeling things that no one can interpret. And that's going to kill the industry, although it sells a lot of bottles of product for a short term. Mm-hmm. And if you're in and out, that's great, like the stock market game. But if we're actually talking about changing the course of humanity, which is what potentially cannabis treatments can do, we need to be very responsible and think about what we're saying to people.
I think what lacks in this industry is a brand that is focused less on money and more on education and science and understanding the why, while everybody is selling the what. I think that company may be in Rochester. I think a couple companies may be in Rochester, but what an awesome conversation. I always appreciate us having a conversation. Yeah. And I do want to tell a quick story before we wrap it up, just to kind of sum up Dr. Smith and I's relationship. So Saturday night, my girlfriend Rachel and I, we had a nice little date night. We made a nice dinner. We were going to have a bonfire, and what better way to top it all off than to get some Yo-Lickety frozen yogurt. So on our way to get it, we do this once a week, but we weren't going to eat it for a couple hours. So we're like, okay, we have to have hot fudge, but it'll melt the ice cream. So we stop at Wegmans on the way, get a can of hot fudge, get our ice cream. We go have dinner, sit around the campfire, and when it came down to ice cream time, as a relatively health conscious consumer, I like to look at what's on the label. So I pull out the jar of hot fudge, and the first ingredient on the jar, high fructose corn syrup, and I was like, man, this stuff has got to be really, really bad for me. And we sat around the fire kind of debating, why is high fructose corn syrup so bad? So naturally, as relatively tech-savvy millennials, we went and started Googling everything. And while I got a couple of blog answers and a couple of this and that, I wasn't comfortable with the information I was getting. So finally, after like 15 minutes of like frenzied frustration, I was like, I'm going to text Harold. He'll have the answer. So it's like 10:30 at night. I'm half drunk and 3/4 stoned, and I'm like, Harold, why is high fructose corn syrup so bad? And Rachel's like, he's never going to answer. It's Saturday night. So fell asleep within like a half hour and woke up to a PhD level response of why high fructose corn syrup is so bad. So I always appreciate having a friend that is such a wealth of knowledge and an expert in the industry. And I can't thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being on here today.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
I hope everybody enjoyed this episode. Again, this is Roc NORML Radio. This Thursday, we'll be out at the Cinema Theater on the corner of South Clinton and Goodman to see The Grass is Greener. And then next Thursday, May 30th, is Home Growing Rochester's Economy, a community conversation about the importance of allowing home cultivation and home brewing and how it will create a prosperous and thriving micro industry. So with that, this is Steve Vanderwall. I'm the Deputy Chief of Roc NORML, and we are out.